love of marketing. Hope everybody's doing great. I am Namrata and that is Simon. Hi, so how are you, Simon?
I'm good now. How are you doing?
I'm good. It's a good weather. It's superb in India right now, touch wood. So yeah,
Oh, was it
really
cooled
happy with
down?
that. Yeah, it cooled down. It rains a little. Yeah, not too
Perfect.
much rain, but enough to not get too heated. So it's pretty good.
Perfect. Yeah, it's been up and down here, but that's it's always up and down here, So
Yeah. Um, yeah, this week I wanted to talk about the metaverse. That's something that has been
mm,
headlining for such a long time with no real results or anything that we can quantify that with. So, yeah, like for people who are like new to this term metaverse, who have never heard about it, what is metaverse like technically and from the perspective of
well,
marketing, what it is?
technically, that's a very good question. Yeah, I can't imagine there's too many people out there that haven't heard about this at all. Obviously, it's been such a big buzz, and the fact that of course, Facebook as a business have changed their name to Meta a few months ago now has obviously made news with most people. But what is the metaverse? I think the simple answer is we don't really know. I think there's a clear direction. Well, I say clear. There is a direction of travel for some businesses with regards to the metaverse, which is that the creation of effectively a sort of an internet world that you can live within to some extent, right? And to what extent is a question. Will we get it to a place where some people spend the majority of their time in the metaverse, or will it always be something that we just dip into? Is a bit of a question mark. But yeah, certainly there's a lot of vision around virtual reality and an internet that you interact with in its truest sense. So being in there, living it, seeing it, walking around it, touching, that sort of thing. So I think that's a big part of what the metaverse will be. As a result, there's associations with things like NFTs, things like cryptocurrencies, and all that needs to play a part in some way. So it's an odd area. The term has been around actually for a little while, but yeah, I think everyone has their own view. Google are doing work in this space. Obviously, Facebook are doing work in this space. Lots of people are. What it eventually becomes is a question mark, and there are certainly some challenges from a technology perspective around what's possible to deliver something as sophisticated as the metaverse. It's going to take a fair amount of bandwidth and technology resource to genuinely be able to deliver it, as well as equipment in the homes of the people who want to engage in it. So it's a big question, and what the future of it looks like, I don't know, and I don't think anyone really knows yet. There are people who probably know a little bit more than me, or a bit closer to it, but I don't think anyone truly knows. So ultimately, it's the next level of the internet, where we've gone from early, here are some web pages, to let's have a bit more of an interactive internet, to let's truly engage with the internet as an environment, I suppose, rather than a platform.
Yeah, the talks of metaverse reminds me of that game Sims. I don't know if you've heard about it, but
yeah. I used to play The Sims a long time ago.
I used to be obsessed with it as a child. So it would be interesting if it is more like an adult version, like a bit more mature version of it. So there's one.
I suppose so. I mean, it's an interesting comparison. I mean, I suppose like The Sims in some regards, but you would be one of the Sims, but you wouldn't be simulated. I don't know if that's a terrible example, but that sort of thing, I suppose. Yeah, Sims was a great game. I have to say, I was a little bit addicted to that for a while.
Yeah, the teenage me loved it. Like, thank God I got like rid of that obsession. Nice memories of that game. So yeah, like before like we move on to metaverse and such complicated things, it's also important to understand the history of the web. And I keep seeing this term web 3.0 thrown around very often. So what's that? What is web 3.0?
Yeah, I mean, it's the web. It sort of alludes to some of the points I just made. Really, it's the web moving into its next clear iteration, I suppose. I mean, obviously there are always developments going on in technology and experiences, and you can draw a line in certain places about where there's been a significant change in what that is. You know, as I mentioned earlier, the web at the beginning in the 90s was a static place where there were some pages that you could go to that gave you some text and some images, and you read that, and you had some simple browsers. You didn't have Google Chrome, etc. You had something that was sort of Netscape Navigator, that sort of thing that was around, and you had banner advertising, and it was quite simplistic. Obviously, still incredibly powerful and revolutionary. The move from nothing to Web 1.0 will still be the biggest move out of all of them, but quite basic in using HTML. So we moved on to Web 2.0 in the 2000s. And that created the ability to write in more dynamic code, and therefore create an interactive web, basically. So that's what gave us the rise of social media, really. Being able to have the feeds and user-generated content, and websites that were smart and were you can interact with them, would change in real time as you were using them. That gave us Facebook, it gave us Instagram, it gave us Airbnb, it gave us everything you can think of today as being a real core part of the internet as it is. Advertising became a lot more interactive. Of course, at the time, internet speeds were vastly improving as well. With Web 1.0, we had dial-up speeds, very, very slow. You couldn't really watch videos or even look at a large image on the internet. As you went through Web 2.0, of course, most people started to get a faster internet, potentially Wi-Fi in the house. So it became an interactive platform as it is today, with some really nice dynamic things going on. As we move into Web 3.0, that's a lot of the technology that is pretty exciting at the moment. It starts to take more dominance. So things like AI, which is still developing, but over the last 10 years has made some big strides. There's a lot of really good AI platforms out there. Most of them are still making mistakes, not perfect yet, and that's fine. That's the process we go through, obviously, in developing things like this. But AI, of course, blockchain, which is obviously a foundation to cryptocurrency. The data networks become decentralized, and advertising as a result can be a lot more sophisticated. And of course, we can bring in VR, and we've got again, internet getting faster and faster all the time, but also we've got 5G now as well, so the internet's pretty fast on a mobile device as well. So we have an environment that enables us to create more interactive, powerful things as well. So that then gives us the ability to create a VR based experience on the internet as well. So all those elements that we hear about cryptocurrency, blockchain, AI, VR, all those sophisticated technologies start to become more predominant in Web 3.0. So that's effectively the journey of Web 1 to 2 to 3.
Yeah, I think Metaverse is going to be something historical that we are going to witness as a generation. I mean, I remember internet used to be something that was a very rare commodity. It wasn't available for everyone, and it was such a cool thing to have at your house. And it was using internet was such a cult of a very few people, and now it's accessible. So do you think Metaverse initially would be for very few people, not for everybody? And if it is not for everybody, would it be smart for marketers to invest in this channel?
That's a really good question, actually. I mean, most technologies, when they launch, go on a technology adoption curve, which I talk about in digital marketing strategy, actually. So I think those sort of innovators and early adopters will certainly be embracing it. Those are the ones that will be looking out for the change. There'll be those, there'll include the people that are building and growing the technology themselves, but also those that maybe have the time, the money, and the interest to go and develop. I mean, I know a number of people who've had very sophisticated VR headsets for quite a few years, and even when there wasn't really much to do with a VR headset, they still went out and got one because they were an early adopter and passionate about technology and innovation. I didn't at the time because I didn't really see the value in buying something that I couldn't really do much with. But still touching on experiencing it through other people's headsets, but it's not something that I massively embrace yet. I think there will be. I think it will be difficult for everyone to get involved in. So there are definitely going to be early adopters. I think as marketers, our opportunities are going to be fairly limited at the beginning as well. As they are on all channels. I mean, again, we look at social media, right? Of course, nowadays, social media is a huge marketing opportunity for brands through organic social, but also through all the advertising channels. At the beginning, all those opportunities weren't there. So exactly the same with the metaverse. I see opportunities for brands, and I would expect some of the larger brands to get involved quite early on and try and make a mark and test and see what they can learn. And I think if you've got the resources in terms of people, money, time as a brand to keep us on a track of what's going on with the metaverse and what can we do in that field. I think you should be doing that. Certainly, it's not something most brands would have time to do, but certainly it's something that I would expect the likes of sort of Nike and those top brands to be playing with. I think as marketers in the early days, let's keep a close eye on it, see what we can do. But I think it's going to be a number of years before it becomes mature enough for us to really have developed marketing strategies around the metaverse.
Yeah, that is something that everybody should look forward to, and it's exciting. Like we associate TikTok with Gen Z and Instagram or Pinterest with millennials. Who would you associate like metaverse, if and when and how it grows, like based on that, like what kind of target audience we can expect there?
Cool, that's a good question. I mean, it's certainly in the earlier days going to be a younger audience that want to embrace it. I mean, there are already sort of virtual worlds. They're not in virtual reality, but there are worlds where you can effectively create avatars and go and live and communicate. I mean, they've been around since Second Life, which was obviously big many years ago, and even before that, really. We as humans always gravitate towards communities. That's what we've done. That's why we still exist today. Because if we're out there trying to survive on our own, we wouldn't last long against a bear or something. So we've tended to move together into communities, and that's what's given us farming and everything else that's kept us going and kept us alive. So I think it will naturally be the same, that as communities start to build on the metaverse, people will naturally gravitate towards them. So I see it happening with the younger audiences, certainly wanting to be on there, wanting to have their clubs and their groups and their communities and sort of virtually live together. If you can't choose who you live with in the real world, maybe you can choose who you live with in the metaverse. And I think that's going to be interesting. I think there will need to be rules in place for how young people can use the metaverse as well. I think with technology, we always need to consider mental health and wellness. And I think the metaverse is one that we need to have a big think about what impact that can have there. But I still expect people who are my sort of generation to get involved as well. So I'm Gen X, but I think Gen X and millennials, I would think, would want to get involved and might be a bit more financially able to get involved than the younger generation would be. So I expect it to be that. I wouldn't expect your boomers to get involved in it particularly. I'm sure that there'll be some outliers who will, of course, but I wouldn't expect en masse that generation to be heavily involved. To be honest with you, I think it's by the time it reaches a level of maturity, your youngest baby boomer is going to be 60 something. So I think that's unlikely. But yeah, so it's a difficult one to answer. But I certainly think it's those that are coming through, that probably my children who are still quite young, and up to my age roughly, I would think.
And yeah, as you said, I think privilege will also have a very big part to play for people to be able to access metaverse. And like you talked about Nike and all these brands, do you think like it would be a concept like apps, like first Meta like has Facebook as an app, and then Metaverse, like Google will have its own kind of universe where people can interact, and every company will slowly start coming up with their own versions of this thing.
Well, I think it's possible. I mean, as we know,
Mhm.
metaverse is a term rather than a platform. So, is it possible there will be multiple metaverses? Yes, I think it probably is. It seems likely, in fact, that there will be different places you can experience. I think the big question for me is whether those merge into one or not, whether they become different commercial enterprises and experiences. Because, as we said, cryptocurrency plays a part in this. And yeah, there can be, and there are many different cryptocurrencies. I mean, they're all having a terrible time at the moment. The cryptocurrencies are absolutely crashing and dying. So we'll see what happens with cryptos generally over the coming years. But assuming they survive and rebound, it could well be a situation where there are different platforms owned by different businesses which use different cryptocurrencies, and have different rules. But what happens with that will be interesting, because whilst this is genuinely going to be an interactive environment that you're part of, and that's how you're browsing the internet, and is how you're experiencing things, and you're sort of living within that, and you're buying things through cryptocurrency. You're buying virtual houses and boats and planes and all this sort of stuff that within that world. The only way that's really going to work if it's a genuine community, as we were talking about, as if the people you care about are on it. So with social media, you can be on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and TikTok and Snapchat and all of those, and all your friends can be on all of those as well, and you can all interact together on all of them all day, and that's absolutely fine. With the metaverse, if you're within it and you're building a life and an identity and an environment within it whilst interacting with the world within it, then you want your friends to be within it as well. You don't want them to be in a different one. So that for me is a question mark, and this is not an area that I'm a deep expert on at all. So I'd love to talk to someone, and perhaps we'll get a guest on the podcast in the near future to talk about the metaverse in more detail. But I think that's one question mark for me. If this does become an environment that you live within, then to live within it, you need all your friends to live within it. So what happens there? Do we have ultimately people moving towards one metaverse where that wins out and everyone has their communities within that? Or do friends operate in different metaverses, or do the metaverses all join up in some way? So that for me is a big question mark. And like I say, I think perhaps let's bring a guest on to talk about that sometime soon.
Yeah, this is also exciting, like imagining how our digital world will be altered, a real world, every possible kind of universe would exist, like Multiverse of Madness. Yeah, so
Trademark.
what do you yeah what do you think is the cause of delay here with metaverse? Is it the cryptocurrency crashing, or like something is happening big behind the scenes? What is the reason for this delay, and how will it impact users? Like, will people be like, oh, done with the hype and not be looking forward to it anymore, or what?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. See, I don't know if there is a delay as such. It takes time, right? I mean, we're talking about building an entire interactive environment for people with all of its own rules and culture and everything else and technology. So I'm not sure there's a delay. I think the announcement wasn't, Facebook changed the name to Meta wasn't, okay, we've changed the name to Meta, now we're about to launch the Metaverse. It was more of a strategic future direction for the business and what it sees as the view of the industry. So I don't think there's a delay. I think it takes a long time to build something like this. There's a huge amount of considerations. There are certainly technology problems that need to be overcome, as we were talking about earlier, with regards to your ability to host and run something of this scale that actually works. Of course, there is mass adoption of VR. If this is going to be an entirely VR environment, the vast majority of people do not have the capability to get into VR, and whilst the penetration of the internet and computers around the world is very significant now, about 2/3 of the world, and certainly most of the places where there is internet, a good percentage of people have access to it. It's nowhere near that with VR, and it won't be anywhere near that with VR for a very, very long time. So you're only going to have small communities, as you say, the sort of privileged at the moment, those that can afford to go out and say, why don't I spend $300 or $400 on a VR headset, because that'll be something fun to do. That's not something everyone can do, certainly. So until that becomes more mainstream, that's a major blocker as well, assuming this is going to be a pure VR environment. So there are a number of blockers there around technology and cultural adoption, but also in terms of just rules and how are we going to behave within the metaverse. So yeah, I don't think it's delayed. I think it's just going to take a number of years. The question for me is, when we look at the metaverse in 20 years time, is it going to be a hilarious, stupid thing that we were talking about, or is it genuinely going to be something that still operates and is interesting? Because obviously the internet is well established, no one laughs about that, but there have been plenty of technologies and ideas that have come and gone, and VR itself has come and gone many times over the last 30 years, and it has been a bit of a joke at times. So it needs to be truly transformational and accessible if this is going to work. So yeah, so I wouldn't say there are delays, but this isn't going to happen tomorrow.
Yeah, it is. It will be exciting to see, like, if all it is worth the hype, or something that like lasts a week or something. Especially with our generation, like nothing lasts for very long, and we get bored very easily. Yeah, I know we are running out of time, but I have to ask this another question. Like, how do you feel about Mark Zuckerberg owning the metaverse? Like, with his history with privacy and data protection, it makes me a little uncomfortable personally. But what are your thoughts on that? Like,
oh, let's have a discussion about Mark Zuckerberg. Okay, so I have to be very careful how I answer this question now. You should be a journalist. So I think that definitely it's controversial, right? I think we all know that Facebook has had some very poor behaviors over the years. We know they've done a lot of things with manipulating the feeds and with misuse of data. So you're right to point that out. What are the opportunities for him to do the same with the metaverse? I don't think Mark Zuckerberg is out there deliberately trying to harm anyone. I don't think he's trying to steal data or make anyone's lives miserable. I think he's just a guy who basically says, look, I've got all this access to this data, and I would like to learn things from that, and I would like to see what we can do to influence things that I'm interested in, which is so obviously technology and changing the direction of the future, and to provide experiences. And I think he's genuinely coming at it as an entrepreneur that wants to test and learn and develop and change the future. I don't think he's coming at it with any sort of just untoward, negative, nasty approach. So yeah, I'm not concerned that people joining the metaverse are joining something that might be dangerous to them in any way, or quite dark. But I think you're right to point out that it's an environment that, depending on what attitude he takes, your data may be used in certain ways. They might, you might be monitored how you move around and what you interact with and what you do, and it's even possible conversations could be monitored and things like that. So, which of course there's been a lot of nervousness around with Amazon Alexa, I don't believe it's happening, but certainly there have been issues there as well. So I think it's something that you need to be wary of. Certainly in the early stages of the metaverse, it's possible that it could be built without as much attention to privacy as we have in other places at the moment, because it's a new channel. So I think, it's important to be wary. As marketers, it's important to think about it in terms of brand protection. So you should be considering what could happen here and how that could backfire on you particularly. So looking at things like GDPR and Californian Privacy Act and things like that, and how they will play out on the platform versus just general privacy, data storage, monitoring. As a brand, you don't want that to backfire on you, even if you haven't done anything wrong. So be careful there. As individuals, as with anything, be cautious, read the T's and C's, which no one ever does. Yeah, be cautious. It's a good point to point out, Nam, but I'm not going to go so far as to say I think he's going to do anything dodgy. But it's certainly possible that things could go in a direction that are not ideal for users. Is that enough sitting on the fence for you?
Yeah. I think personally, we should always be cautious while we are using technology and any new tool in general.
Yeah.
And Metaverse would be more invasive. So we should be cautious all the time. It's like not even in terms of who owns the platform, but also in general, in every platform, despite how safe it might seem, we should always have our guards up and not give in our 100% to social medias and the digital world.
We don't. What we don't want is people walking around in the metaverse being followed around or sort of listened to with regards to conversations that they're having and things that they're doing, and then have sort of virtual individuals that are effectively marketing bots saying, "Oh, I heard you were talking about this, so let's have a chat about that." We don't want to create those, because that could happen in the real life, right? Where you could be talking about something in a bar and someone overhears you and comes up and says, "Oh, I just heard about da 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 da," has a conversation with you about it. We don't want to turn that into those individuals being marketing bots that are coming up to you because they're listening into you and watching your behavior. So, I genuinely don't know, but I think there will be some experimentation around what can be done with that. And I think users and marketers need to be very consciously aware of not creating an environment that is unpleasant for people.
All I can say is let's see how everything turns out. And I hope it's not a big joke, like we are having such deep conversations about it, and then we revisit it 10 years down the line and be like, what? We were thinking way too much about it.
Google Glass all over again.
There are a lot of things that we talked about in this interview. Are there any key takeaways for the audiences?
Well, I think as marketers, the key takeaways are watch this space, right? I mean, this is a new emerging piece of technology. As I say, whether you are at a big brand or a small one, you still need to have an eye on this. Whether you've got the money and the people and the resources to invest in it or not, you should still be tracking this, because as this evolves, as with any piece of technology, if it really does take off, consumers are going to be on it. Now, even if you're not on it as a brand, you need to understand what the consumers that are on it are doing, what they're thinking, what they're saying. In the same way, when Snapchat or TikTok, going back to being a kid, when TikTok take off, there are a lot of marketers at the time were like, well, we don't sell to teenagers, so we don't need to worry about that. But of course, neither of those are about teenagers anymore. And being part of that technology and embracing it and understanding it is really important. So you don't have to set up a brand campaign, you don't have to have a strategy for it, but you have to keep a finger on the pulse. And that, at the moment, whilst it's still emerging and developing, is just something I would encourage everyone to do. Follow their news as marketers, stay in touch, and that's all I can say at this stage.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Simon, for your time. I hope everybody had a good time today. And see you all the next time. For more marketing tips and advice, subscribe us on YouTube and follow our podcast on Spotify and Apple. Thank you so much.